I knocked the way you always knock. 3 times. Hard. You learn the sound doors make in these buildings. The doors are all the same. Hollow core, press board, Soviet standard. You knock, you wait, you knock again. 9th floor. There was a problem with the drainage below his unit. Neighbors had been complaining. Water backing up on the 7th and 8th floors. Standard job. Get access, check the joints. 10 minutes.
The 24th of October, 1996. Novokuznetsk. Deep in the coal basin of Siberia, a city of 600,000 people that had been built to make steel, and by 1996 was running out of reasons to exist. A municipal heating technician stands on the 9th floor of Pionersky Prospect 53, a prefabricated concrete apartment block identical to 10,000 others across the former Soviet Union. 9 stories, 80 families, thin walls, shared plumbing. He has been sent to check a drainage problem. He knocks on apartment 357. Nobody opens. Then a voice from inside, muffled by the door.
I'm mentally unwell. Mother locked me in.
I stood there, tried again. Same answer. He would not open it. And I could smell something. I thought maybe he had a dog, and the dog had died, and he hadn't cleaned it up. It happens. In these buildings, it happens. But the smell was wrong for that. It was thicker, sweeter. I went downstairs and called the police.
The plumber did not go back upstairs. He waited outside the building. Within the hour, a district officer arrived. To the officer, this was a municipal access complaint. A tenant refusing entry to a heating technician on a working day. The officer knocked on apartment 357 and got the same answer. Then, the officer forced the lock. In the seconds between the impact and the officer's first step inside, Alexander Spisivtsev moved through the apartment, past the kitchen to the balcony. He climbed out, reached the roof, and disappeared over the far side of the building. Soon after, the task force arrived. Alexander Spisivtsev was gone. The officer was still in the hallway. He had not moved beyond the entrance. What was in the apartment behind him would take forensic teams 3 weeks to fully process. These weeks, officers walked from room to room with cameras, notebooks, evidence bags, and a kind of training that, in the end, was not enough. My name is Clement. I'm Russian, and this is a one-person production. The research, the writing, the sound, and every voice you hear. You're listening to Apartment 357, a season of Russia Unheard. Each season tells a different true story from the country I was born in. More seasons are coming. Subscribe so you can hear them all. This series is a dramatization based on real events. The story is drawn from publicly available materials about a real case. Dialogues are reconstructed. Some character voices are composite. Where individuals were not convicted of crimes, I say so clearly. This series is intended for adult listeners. The subject matter is graphic. The most extreme content is referenced rather than depicted. Listener discretion is advised. The district officer who first entered apartment 357 was 28 years old. He had been with the Novokuznetsk police for 4 years. He had attended training on serious crime scenes. He had seen bodies before. He had seen the aftermath of fights, of accidents, of suicides. He had been told what to do. None of it prepared him for what was on the other side of that door. The apartment was a 3-room Soviet flat, standard layout, the kind that half the city lived in. Narrow hallway, coat hooks on the left, shoes by the door, a wall calendar from a local bakery. Ordinary. Then the smell hit him. Not the faint smell the plumber had noticed from the corridor, the full thing. The inside the apartment version, concentrated and warm, trapped behind a door. The officer covered his mouth with his sleeve. He kept walking. He heard movement at the far end of the apartment, fast away from him. A door opening, the balcony. He took 2 steps towards the sound. Then he looked left, into the kitchen. He stopped walking. He stopped thinking about the suspect.
When I arrived, the district officer was still standing in the hallway. He had not gone any further. He could not. He gave his statement in 3 separate sessions over the next 2 weeks. Then, he took an extended leave. Several officers who responded to the apartment in those first days did.
This is the investigator assigned to the case. Within an hour of the officer's call, he was on the 9th floor. Within 3 hours, the forensic team was in the apartment. Within a day, the federal authorities had been informed. The processing took weeks. I will describe what was found using the language of the forensic record. I will be brief. In the kitchen, the surfaces had been used. A pot on the stove, bowls on the counter, a dishcloth folded beside the sink. The kitchen table had been used for purposes the forensic team documented across 4 pages of clinical reporting. The remains in the kitchen were partial. Some of the contents on the counter had been prepared as food. In the bathroom, a torso in the bathtub, a head and chest in the cistern tank. Forensic identification would later confirm. 13-year-old Zhenya, missing since September, reported missing repeatedly by her mother, each report dismissed. In the main room, a mattress on the floor. The carpet was stained in patterns the team photographed from multiple angles. Against one wall, a television, still plugged in. The remote control on the arm of a chair. Curtains on the window. Food in the refrigerator. Someone had been living here. In one corner, a pile of clothing of different sizes. The inventory, completed in the 3rd week, would total 82 individual garments, all of them stained with blood. None of the blood stains matched anyone in the Spesivtsev family. Beside the clothing, 40 pieces of personal jewelry, rings, bracelets, earrings, items that had belonged to people who wore them daily, and torn photographs, not family photographs, photographs of unidentified children. Someone states the team handled with particular care. Many of the items could not be matched to identified victims. A large black dog was in the apartment. It had been part of the household. The forensic team would know the dog showed no fear of people. It had been around people regularly. It was part of the household. The dog was put down within 48 hours of the apartment being secured.
You prepare for what you think you're going to see. You tell yourself you have training for this. Then you walk in and the training is not enough. Nothing is enough. The layout of the apartment was standard. I grew up in an apartment like that. Same kitchen, same bathroom. That was the part that stayed with me. The normality of the space. The clothing was the thing I could not process, not the remains. The clothing. Because clothing means people, and we were looking at more sets of clothing than we had missing persons reports for. We were looking at people who had never been reported missing, people who had never been recorded as existing.
In the building, the neighbors were beginning to gather. Word had moved through the floors. the way news always moves through a Soviet apartment block. Fast, fragmentary, accurate at the center and wrong at the edges. By evening, the residents of Pionersky Prospect 53 knew that something had happened at apartment 357. They did not yet know what. A woman who lived on the 9th floor, 2 doors down, had been giving her statement to officers since the afternoon. Her name was Lydia Vedenina. She had lived in this building since 1978.
I knew the family, the mother, the son, the dog, the sister who came every day. They kept to themselves. It was unusual for the building. In those days, everyone knew everyone. You borrowed sugar. You watched each other's children, not them. The mother and the son never said hello on the stairs. And they never used the lift. Not once. 9 floors, every day. They took the stairs. I always thought that was strange. Who walks 9 floors when there is a lift?
Lydia Vedenina had told officers something else in the statement she gave that afternoon. Something that was not yet considered important. She had called the police about apartment 357 before, in the summer, about the smell, about the music. They had not come. That part of her statement would matter later. It would matter a great deal. But on the 24th of October, 1996, in the corridor outside apartment 357, the forensic team was still photographing the main room. The 82 garments had not yet been counted. The dog had not yet been put down. And in a back room, behind a closed door, the officers had not yet found the girl. The back room of apartment 357 was the one furthest from the front door. Smallest room in the apartment, a window covered but not sealed. There was a sofa against one wall. There were homemade handcuffs on the floor, attached to a bracket bolted into the wall. And on the sofa, a girl, conscious, looking at the officer who had just opened the door. She was 15 years old. The medical team that examined the girl at the hospital drew their conclusion almost immediately. They said, she will not survive. They were correct. In the days that followed, she would tell the investigators everything she could remember, whilst the doctors tried to keep her alive long enough to finish. Her injuries, as documented in the medical record, multiple stab wounds to the abdomen and chest, a broken left arm, the fracture had been set badly by someone with no medical training, ligature marks at her wrists and ankles, burns of various ages, infections that had gone untreated for weeks, malnutrition, dehydration, a skin condition consistent with prolonged immobility. Her name was Olga. She had gone missing on the 24th of September. Her parents had reported her missing. The report had been filed. No officer had been assigned. She was a teenager. Teenagers run away. She had been in apartment 357 for 31 days. Olga was transported by ambulance to Novokuznetsk City Hospital. She was admitted in the late afternoon. By evening, the medical assessment had been made and communicated to the investigators waiting in the corridor outside her room. A prosecutor was called. A tape recorder was brought to the bedside. The decision to take her statement immediately was made because there might not be a tomorrow. The investigators sat up in her room and asked her if she could speak. She said she could.
She was lying on her side. She could not sit up. She was on painkillers, but she was lucid. She knew exactly what she wanted to say. She had been waiting to say it. I think she had been waiting to say it for a month.
The first question, by procedure, was always the same. The prosecutor asked it. He asked her how she had come to be in apartment 357. Olga's answer was a single word.
Babushka.
The Russian word for grandmother. For an older woman, not necessarily a relative. The Russian word a child might use for any kind of woman they didn't know.
Babushka.
In Olga's testimony, given over the 3 days that followed, she would describe the older woman she had met on the 24th of September. She would describe two friends, Nastya and Zhenya, who had walked into apartment 357 with her and who had not walked out. She would describe a month. She would describe what she had seen. She would describe what she had been made to do. The full testimony is the subject of a later episode. On her first afternoon in the hospital, Olga said 3 things that mattered immediately. The first was the word babushka. The second was a sentence.
There was an older woman near the building. She asked us to help her open a door. The key was stuck on the lock. We went up with her, up the stairs.
Olga gave investigators a description of the older woman, approximately 55 years old, short, stocky, grey hair, a wool coat, a small bunch of keys in her hand. She had been polite. She had thanked the girls for helping her. 9 flights of stairs. Olga gave investigators a description that matched exactly. A woman the building's residents had been observing on the stairs for decades.
By midnight of the first day, we had her name. We had her address. The address where she actually lived, alone, 6 blocks away. We had her work history, which was, I admit, the thing that surprised me most. I expected an ordinary woman. I did not expect a woman who had worked at the procurator's office. I did not expect a woman who had worked around the court system for years.
The woman was not difficult to find. Officers went to her apartment that evening. She opened the door. She let them in. She offered them tea. Her name was Lyudmila Spesivtseva. She was Alexandra Spesivtsev's mother. She did not resist arrest. She did not deny knowing about apartment 357. She offered them, in fact, an explanation, or what she presented as one.
I will answer for 4 buckets of remains. About the rest, I know nothing.
4 buckets. The number is specific. The number is, when you consider what the contents of those 4 buckets must have been, a number that admits a great deal. Lyudmila Spesivtseva claimed that the rest was a matter she knew nothing about. The rest included 82 sets of clothing. The rest included Olga, alive, in a hospital bed in the same city. Alexander Spesivtsev was not in his mother's apartment when officers arrived there. For 3 days, the city did not know where he was. They searched. They put his description on regional television.
Attention, residents of Novokuznetsk. Police are searching for Alexander Spesivtsev, 26 years old. Last seen in the area of Pionersky Prospect. Do not approach. Contact the duty officer immediately.
They sent officers to every property associated with the family. They watched the train stations and the bus depot. They issued an alert to the federal police. The city of 600,000 people, which had been hunting an unknown killer for months, now had a name to attach to him. And the man with the name was somewhere inside the city, on foot, with no money and a broken plan. The police found Alexander Spesivtsev 3 days after the door came down. He was at his own building entrance, Pionersky Prospect 53. He was sitting on a bench just inside the entryway. the kind of bench where pensioners sometimes rest before climbing the stairs. He was cold. He was thinly dressed. He had not eaten since he left the apartment. The officers who approached him expected resistance. There was no resistance. Alexander Spisivtsev looked up and said nothing. He did not run. He had nowhere left to go. Alexander Spisivtsev was 26 years old. He had been released from a psychiatric hospital, declared sane, less than 2 years earlier. Why he had been released and how he had managed to live undetected in this building during a citywide manhunt for a serial killer the police was searching for elsewhere, these are the questions of later episodes. After the arrest, he was put into a police car and driven to the holding facility where his mother had spent the previous 3 nights. But by then, Lyudmila Spisivtseva had been moved to the Women's Pretrial Detention Center. Mother and son did not see each other on the day of his arrest. They would, eventually, be tried separately. The mother's trial would conclude first. Her 13-year sentence would begin in 1998. She would serve it at the Mariinsk Women's Colony, 200 kilometers east of Novokuznetsk. She would be released in 2008. Her son, Alexander Spisivtsev, would be tried for 4 murders. The diary recovered from his apartment, the photographs, the 82 garments, the bones in the river that the city had already known about for months. These would be discussed and entered into evidence, and largely set aside. The prosecution could prove only what it could prove. It would prove 4. It would take almost 30 years before the number changed. Olga died in hospital several days after she was found. The medical record gives the cause of death as peritonitis and pulmonary edema. She was 15 years old. She had been at Novokuznetsk City Hospital for several days. She had given her testimony in fragments, with breaks for medication and consciousness. Her parents were with her when she died. They had been with her since the first night. They had been told she would not survive, and they had been told to make her last hours easy. And she used those hours to tell the truth. This is the case. A plumber knocked on a door. A district officer forced it open. A girl was alive in the back room. A mother answered the door of her own apartment and offered 4 buckets. A man was arrested 3 days later at his own building entrance because he had nowhere else to go. But to understand how this apartment existed undisturbed for years, on the 9th floor of a residential building in a city of 600,000 people, to understand how a woman could call the police about the smell more than once and not be heard, to understand how the man hunting the Novokuznetsk monster had been searching for months in every place except the one place he actually was, you have to understand the city around the apartment, the country around the city, the decade Russia was living through in 1996, while bodies were appearing in a river and a teacher was counting empty desks. That's the next episode, The River.